Hey friends, I'm Becca, and if you don't already know about me, I have a YouTube channel where I do lots of quilty things right here on YouTube, and I would love it if you would come over and check out my channel. All of my details for social media will be in the description box down below. What I'm going to walk you through today is making this really cool little project that I made for my mom. I call it a money envelope because I am horrible with naming things. You can find this pattern on my website, and that will be linked in the description box down below as well. This is a really easy project. You just need some SF101 lightweight interfacing, 2 fat quarters, your normal sewing supplies, and some form of a closure. For the purpose of this video, I am going to use canned snaps. So we're going to switch to the overhead view and we're going to get to work. This is really easy and we'll have it done in a matter of minutes. So here are my supplies. I have my SF101, my fabric, and some cam snaps, which is what I'm going to use for my closure of my little money envelope. The pattern does say that you only need a fat eighth of your exterior and interior fabric, but spoiler alert, I pulled 2 fat quarters because first of all, these fabrics are gorgeous and I wanted to work with them, but that size fabric, I actually have more readily available in my studio, so I just grabbed these. It just means I'm either going to have some nice big scraps or I'm going to be able to make 2. Let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is press my fabric. I am going to lightly starch it because that's just who I am. And then once my fabric is pressed, I'm going to cut one 10 by 8 inch piece of my interior, one 10 by 8 inch piece of my outside, and then 2 10 by 8 inch pieces of my SF101. Whenever I pull this little pressing surface out, I always get people asking me if I made this pressing board. I did not. I actually bought it, but there are a ton of tutorials out there in the YouTube world that would walk you through making one of these. They are very handy. And for those of you that are curious, the starch that I'm using on the fabric is Mary Ellen's Best Press. I love this stuff, and I buy it by the gallon. So that's 1 fat quarter down. Let's move on to the next one. I'm sure somebody's going to want to know what fabric I'm using to put this little money envelope together with, and I'm going to tell you, I have no idea. These are both batik fat quarters that came in a Cotton Cuts box that I got some time back. They seem to work well together, and I just grabbed them out of my fat quarter bins and decided I'd use them up. Also, for those of you that don't know me, blue is one of my favorite colors. Hi, my name is Becca. I love the color blue and long walks on the beach. Anybody else get serious vibes back to those video dating profiles from the 80s? I did. Now that all of our fabric is nice and starched and pressed, it's time to cut it out and put that interfacing on the back. That SF101 is a lightweight fusible interfacing. It's going to add a little bit of stiffness and body to your money envelope, and I like to put it on the outside as well as the inside. But if you want a quilted look and you don't have any of this available, spoiler alert, you could substitute in some batting if you really wanted to. I would go with a really thin batting, maybe some fusible fleece or something of that sort. Okay, so I've got my fabric laid out in front of me, and the first thing that I'm going to do is cut off an 8 inch by 10 inch piece of my fabrics. I have my exterior and interior stacked on top of each other so that I only have to do the cutting once. So here is my 8 inch mark and my 10 inch mark. Now I am leaving a little bit of room for air so that I can make sure that I don't miscut on the bottom piece since things aren't completely lined up. So I'm going to cut those 2 edges and then I'm going to flip it around and square it up. This is a very beginner-friendly project, and it is quite forgiving. And you can make it a little bit wider or a little bit longer. It doesn't matter. So if this comes out a little bit smaller or bigger than your 8 by 10 inch pieces that the pattern call for, don't freak out. But check this out. This is all the fabric that I need, and out of my fat quarter, I have all of this as scrap, so I could probably get maybe 2 more out of this and still have some good scraps. When it comes time to do the interfacing, I do things just a little bit differently. I like to lay my fabric onto the interfacing. I put the bumpy side up and I put my fabrics on top of that bumpy side just to make sure that they're going to fit. And then I'll come in with my rotary cutter and I'll rough cut around those pieces of fabric, just like that. And then I'll do the same thing over here. Now it's time to fuse our interfacing to our fabric. And to do that, we need to be a little bit careful because my interfacing is bigger than my fabric. I don't want my iron to touch that bumpy side of the interfacing. So I do this in two phases. The first one is I lightly press to get some of that glue to melt and hold on to the fabric. And then I clean up the edges and I come in with that final iron to really cement in the interfacing. Is it more work? Yeah, but it keeps my iron nice and I don't have to worry about fabric and interfacing sliding and not keeping the raw edges lined up. Ain't nobody got time for that. Let's get to pressing. So as I mentioned, I'm laying this out so that the bumpy side of my interfacing is up and my fabric is laying on top of that. And then I'm just going to come in with an iron and I'm going to glide over the fabric just a little bit. I'm just looking to get some of the glue to melt and hold onto that fabric. I'm not worried about all four corners being perfectly fused down. I'm just going to do that to kind of baste it on there. I'll gently set that aside and do the same thing to the next piece. Now we're going to set the ironing board aside, bring my ruler and rotary cutter in, and we're going to clean up these raw edges. I'm going to take a ruler and just line up the edge of the ruler with that raw edge of the fabric and cut off that excess interfacing. I'm going to do that on all four sides. Now that these are squared up, I'm going to give it a nice final press to make sure that that interfacing is really secured onto the fabric. Don't be afraid to read those instructions for your SF 101. I'll tell you right now, it's been a long time since I've read them, but what I find works well for me is if I apply a hot, high heat to the fabric, and then I'll go back and do the same thing to the back side. And I'll just gently glide my iron over the entire piece of fabric. Once I've finished pressing this, I'll test one of the corners to make sure that there's not any peeling or, kind of lift. You know how like if you get stickers and you kind of play with the corner, you can get in and peel the sticker off the paper. We don't want that to happen to our fabric on this SF101. So make sure to press it really well. Now we have our fabric with that interfacing onto the back, and you can already feel there's a good bit of body to this. This is going to give your little money envelope a little bit of structure. So the next thing that we need to do is mark how we want the shape of our wallet to be. Now, in the pattern that I have created for you, there is a template that you can download, print out, cut out, and trace onto your fabric. But I actually cheat. Let me show you what I do. I know this edge is 8 inches and the center of 8 inches is 4 inches because 8 divided by 2 is 4. Yeah, I paid attention to math class. So I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to measure that 4-inch mark, and I'm just going to put a little dot there with a marking utensil. I'm using an air-soluble pen from Sew. These are my favorite marking utensil for fabric. And then the next thing I'm going to do is turn this around so that I can measure with my ruler. And I'm going to come down about 2.5 inches. And with that same marking pen, I'm going to mark a dash on either side of this fabric. And those marks are going to stay there for a little while. It is air soluble, so they will disappear over time. I don't have to worry about it doing anything weird, like coming back or permanently distorting my fabric. but they are small enough, they're kind of out of the way, so I can just see what I need. There we go. So why did I do that? Because I'm going to make my point. So what I'm going to do next is connect the dots. I'm going to take a straight edge and I'm just going to draw a line from that point on the side to the point in the middle on both sides. I'm trying to make this a little bit darker so that you can see it a little bit better. Do you see that little line that I just drew? We're going to do that on both sides. And it doesn't even have to stay there super long. In fact, if you wanted to just cut it with your rotary cutter instead of marking it, you could totally do that. Because that's honestly our next step. In fact, if you wanted to save yourself a step, you could mark just one of the fabrics, stack them on top of each other, and cut through all the layers all at once. Because honestly, you need this point to be the same on all of your fabric anyway. In fact, you know what? That's exactly what I'm going to do, even though I just marked everything. We'll stack it up like that. We're going to come in and we're going to trim. Just make sure your raw edges are nice and lined up before you do this cutting. I may have said in the pattern to do this on the wrong side of the fabric. It doesn't matter whether you do it on the right side or the wrong side. Just be consistent with whatever it is you are going to do. Would you believe we're almost done? Like, seriously, we're almost done. Our next step is to sew it together, and then once it's sewn together, we're going to fold it, sew it, and put our snap in. So to sew this, we're going to take both of our pieces and we're going to place them right sides together. Right now, it does not matter which one is the inside or the outside. We just need them placed together. And what I like to do is leave a hole in one of those long sides. So you can kind of see I've marked a couple of dots here. That's just going to serve as a visual for me while I'm sewing to stop when I get here and start when I get here. Maybe I should have said start and then stop. Not going to stitch in between these. I'm going to sew around all of these sides at 1/4 of an inch. Make sure when you start your stitching, you do back stitch to keep those stitches from popping. Then we're going to reach into our magic bag of tricks and we're going to grab some of the fabric from inside, if we can get our hand in there, that is. We're going to pull it through the loop. This is what I have heard bag makers refer to as birthing the bag. I'll let you draw the conclusion why they call it that, but that's exactly what we're doing here. We're turning it right side out. As I'm doing this, I am putting my finger into those corners and I'm kind of running it along the seams to get it to lay nice and flat. This will not be the only thing I do. I will take a utensil in there to kind of give it a little bit more form as well. And then I'll probably run an iron over it too before I do my last step. Then I'm going to take this little opening and I'm going to kind of do this fold thing with my fingers. I want the folded edges to line up perfectly with one another. I don't know if you can see that. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to kind of make that really nice and clean. And once I have it lined up, I will take a couple of clips and just kind of hold it down. And then I'm going to do one more press on this whole thing, and then we're going to put this together. Obviously, we don't want to press our Wonder clips, so don't let your heat touch those little plastic clips. That wouldn't be good. I'm focusing on pressing around the edges to get it to lay nice and flat. And if you have a clapper, you could put it on top of these seams around the outside to get it really nice and flat. Now I'm going to take off my clips. I am going to eyeball this, make sure it is nice and lined up. And we're going to bring our iron in for this side and press that down. To give this that envelope look, there are measurements in the pattern that tell you how far up to measure and fold, but I'm gonna tell you right now, I wing it every single time. This is what I do. So super important, what you need to do first is figure out what side is the inside and what side is the outside. I already know I want this to be the inside of my little money envelope and this beautiful fabric to be the outside. Let me know in the comments down below which one you would have chosen. So you can follow the instructions that are in the pattern that show you exactly how to measure this and fold it, but I always eyeball it because I've just made so many of them. I grab this bottom edge, and by the way, this is not closed yet. We're going to close it in this step. And I fold it up so that it's about a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch away from these two little points right here. Not super worried about it. What I am looking for is that these edges are laying nicely on top of one another on that side and this side. Now you can totally clip that if you want to, but I love to wing things, so I don't. Before I take this to my machine and stitch it though, I just want to make sure that it's going to look the way I want it to. So I'm going to hold this down with my thumbs and I'm going to pick up my fingers and pull this little flap over and I'm going to crease it right along that top edge, right along here. I'm going to fold it over and I'm going to look for where this point lands. It should land somewhere down towards the bottom. Just make sure that that point looks good to you. If this is what you are looking for, then you're good to go. You're going to let that flap open back up and we're going to take this to our sewing machine and we're going to stitch all the way up here, pivot across here, come down here, and then back down here. Now, I do want to let you know there's going to be some stress on these seams as you're going in and out of this little money envelope. So I do backstitch over these two areas a few times because I want this to last. Let's go sew this up. I am stitching this, by the way, with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just trying to stay as close to the edge as possible, but I'm not super worried about being exactly right on top of the edge. Less than 1/4 of an inch, probably more than 1/8, I would say. Maybe in some places it's less than 1/8 of an inch. Now you have a little thing that looks like an envelope, and this is great. You could totally use it just like this if you wanted to, but spoiler alert, if that's not secured, you're going to lose the things that are inside. So you want to put some form of a closure on here. You could put a little piece of Velcro, a buttonhole, and a button would be super cute, but I find cam snaps are probably the easiest thing to use for a closure on this. So to put your cam snap together, you're going to need your 4 pieces of your cam snap. And if you've never worked with these before, you basically have 2 head pieces. I really don't know what these are called, just bear with me here. But you need one that looks like a female end and one that looks like a male end. And these are the 2 pieces that actually snap together. These are the pieces that kind of hold those other pieces in. So you need 4 pieces all together. And of course, your setting tool and your little sharp pointer that's going to help you poke a hole through the fabric where you're going to do all this. And it's really, really simple. Here's what I do. I close this back up. I kind of eyeball where I want that cam snap to land. So right here looks good. I'm going for center, and I'm just going to push down through that fabric. And then I'm going to lift this up so I actually have the sharp point all the way through there. And I'm going to do the same thing so that it's going through the fabric here. So it's going through the flap and the body. And you're not looking to make a terribly big hole. You just need to be able to see a tiny little hole that you can put your cam snap through. And sometimes you can only feel it. That's fine too. We're going to take this little closure piece, insert it into the body of our bag. This is going to go on the inside, down where your money and credit cards will be. And we're going to put that sharp end through the hole that we just poked. And it does sometimes take a little bit of finesse and finagling because we are going through 2 layers of fabric that are both fused with some SF101. And then I like to take the female end and set that on top of there. I'm going to take my cam snapper, which has a divot on one side and a pressing thing on the other side. Listen, I don't know all the technical terms for this, but what I do know is that the divoted end holds the bottom piece and the white part goes on top. I'm going to make sure it's all lined up nicely, and I'm going to squeeze as hard as I can. Ah! And that should have flattened that little point that was coming up and made that sit on there really nice. Now in that other hole, I'm going to take on the back side. This is the outside piece. My other little flat head, whatever these are called. Push the fabric down around that pointer. Put my male piece on top. And I'm going to take that to push that down a little bit too. And then I'm going to take my cam snap setter thingy-mabob and squeeze that onto. And that should have flattened that piece too. My last step is to snap it together and pull it apart a couple of times to make sure that it's going to hold up to opening. If at any point your snaps come apart, then I just bring this back in and I will squeeze it back one more time. Or if something happened and I broke it in the installation, I'll just pop it out and put a new one in. So that's my money envelope. This came about as a means of necessity. My mom needed something to carry a couple of debit cards, her license, and a few dollar bills. And I made one much smaller than this that literally was the size of a couple of credit cards, and she wanted it to be bigger. And so I designed this one so that it can hold dollar bills without being folded, and you can put some debit cards, credit cards, and maybe even a very small phone down inside. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to check me out on social media, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye!